COVID-19 is the largest health crisis we've faced in more than a century. With a refocused approach on health and wellness, it's essential to master the most up-to-date evidence-based information. Help your clients thrive in their new normal. Grow your business and make a positive impact with NASM's new COVID-19 management course. Free for a limited time. Just click the link in the description.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Master Instructor Roundtable. I'm Regional Master Instructor Marty Miller, here with my fellow Regional Master Instructor, Miss Wendy Batts. Wendy's, how's everything going today?
You know what? Living a dream. Woke up, so it's a good day.
There you go. There you go. And I know you're ready to go here. So yes. Today's topic, and during the promo here, I was thinking about this. We're going to go over CPT version 7, what's new. And I'm like, I think you and I have been around since CPT 1. I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah, I think I was around probably, well, obviously I know I was before it was even integrated and implemented into NASM. So I don't know, do I call that like been around since like the dark ages, the new times? I don't even know, like version 0.
OG.
Yeah, that just says something about my age.
Or experience, right?
Experience.
Here's the good news. We got a lot of cool new content, but if we've been teaching this since, you know, when you were teaching before it was even NASM, and I've been teaching since NASM, the fundamentals are still the same. We still have an evidence-based approach with a tiered system based off movement assessments. But as the industry has changed, we've continued the research and we've continued to add new things, whether it's the soft skills or the, you know, the anatomy and things like that. So here we are, CPT 7, and that's what we're going to go through to let everybody know, you know, depending on when you got your CPT certification, maybe why you may want to, you know, dive back in there and pick up some new content.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this new version because I think it really does. I mean, not only, you know, is it updated research, but the terminology, some of that's changed because of what we're learning as we go along. I mean, you guys think about this, like 20 years ago when, you know, a foam roller was brought into a gym, people were looking at us like we had 5 heads. They didn't understand what we were doing. And now it seems like they're everywhere. People get it. They have a clearer understanding. So, I mean, and that was, you know, 20 years ago. So, you know, with what we're learning, the more in-depth research that's done on movement, you know, movement patterns, biomechanics, as well as, you know, people really kind of picking apart certain things. We always want to provide the most updated research and content. And I think that's really what sets NASM apart and allows us to remain top in the industry because we actually care about what's out there and then, you know, making sure that we have the most updated, you know, content as possible.
Yeah, and I do remember the days of bringing my own foam rollers in and just getting that look like, what is this person doing? So we took one for the team to just make it become like a standard thing. So for all of you that have only been in the industry since, like, what do you mean foam rollers weren't in the gym? No, they weren't. And people thought we were nuts. So
yes,
welcome. So we took one there for that. So cool. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if we, I mean, just kind of talk about what we're going to go over. I mean, basically, when you look at the intro, we really wanted to kind of pick it apart a little bit for you guys. So if you didn't have the updated version, you kind of now can understand what the new text says in comparison to anything 1 through 6 that you may have at your home. And, you know, the reason that we wanted to update the information, like I said, not only is it up to date with the research, however, we wanted to make sure too, you know, that we are streamlined across industry standards. And there are some changes, especially with the terminology as well as some of the acute variables. And that was because of the board of certification requirements. And so we always too have to pair up because we are an accredited certification to make sure that we meet certain standards that they have to have for the testing process. So some of this was not just NASM decided to change it for the sake of changing it. We are changing it for a purpose. And so that's why we wanted to spend this time with you today to make sure that you guys can either, you know, ask us questions, or like I said, once we go through certain things, maybe it'll be like clearer for you to understand why we did what we did.
Yeah. And, you know, I really appreciate how much, you know, NASM puts into always revamping and looking at the products that have been the bread and butter of everything we've been doing for so long. Because, as I said at the beginning, we know these systems work, but there's always those little tweaks and little nuances that come to light. And then also, how do the people that are in the industry need this information so they can be the most successful in their career? So I love the fact that, NASM is willing to rework the content as needed, so that way it's the most relevant and freshest in the industry.
Yeah, and we're going to give you guys kind of a chapter comparison between even our version 6 versus 7. So therefore, you guys can see some of the additions that we made, along with some of the newer content that we included. And like I said, some of the terminology and the rationale behind that. And then, of course, Marty and I, the last, I guess it was the last 2 weeks, we spent some time going over the new cardiorespiratory assessments as well as stage training. So if you missed those, you definitely want to take some time and, go through some of that, because I think with the difference, and we'll get into the slide, but with the differences in some of those changes with how we put someone into a specific stage, it's going to be it's very individualized on someone's personal cardiorespiratory health at that time. And then what we can do to enhance it to make it even better, or, to get people, just doing their cardio at a level that they should be at, so therefore they can move up without overtraining or having some injury, or some other kind of health related issues long term because they're just doing something incorrect.
Yeah, and I was having a conversation today with actually a physician, and he was telling me about all the injuries he was having from trying to be as fit as possible. And because I was speaking to a physician, I was like, okay, let's talk about dosing, right? Because he understood that from a medical standpoint with the pharmacology that he prescribes. He's like, I get it now. And here's a guy who is very schooled and educated on the human body, but really didn't understand why he was making mistakes with his exercise, because he just wanted to progress. And when I started talking about the different stages, and it was like, okay, now this makes sense. Now I have a process to move towards and let my body kind of catch up, so that way I can, exercise progressively but safely. And that's what we've always been about with NASM.
Yes, and there's a couple questions that have already come in. And so Coach L Fitness, will the changes have an impact on the recertification? And the answer to that one, Marty, I'll go ahead and take that one, is no. If you have a valid CPT through NASM, you definitely have to still go through the recertification process. And remember, in order to remain current, you have to have at least 2.0 or 20 hours of continuing education units every 2 years, along with a valid CPR with AED when you're going through the recertification process. You don't have to sit for a new exam or anything like that. However, if you have gone through NASM in the past, we wanted to do this so therefore you had a better understanding of some of the newer content. So therefore, if somebody starts talking about stage training and you're thinking old school 220 minus age times 0.65 to get 65% of that person's, where they should be when they're doing their heart rate, that's no longer correct. And the reason it's not correct is based upon research and what we're finding, that was just it's way too generalized. And so we wanted something more specific, and that's why we made those changes. So recertification is still recertification. However, if you have the new CPT 7 textbook, you want to make sure that you study that particular textbook. So when you sit down for the exam, you have a clearer understanding of what the questions are asking, and that you get those answers correct. There's another one, I'll give it to you, Marty, but can you buy updated material?
Yeah, obviously the answer is yes to that. If you go on the NASM website, you will be able to find the new course and or maybe just the textbook. That might be something that, I still love a physical copy. I know you do, Wendy, as well. It's nice to have the digital, but of course, it's something that you can absolutely add to your library, and that way you have it as a reference. So when we are now doing any of this content, whether it's on any of our podcasts, whether it's my coffee talk, whether it's this here on the Thursdays, we will be referencing some of the new content as the topics move towards that. So it'll be good for everyone to kind of catch up, without a doubt. So that way, people are like, wait a minute, did they change something? It's like, am I in the right place? But there's not drastic changes, but you will catch and notice some for sure.
Yes, and if you guys want to see, this is a comparison. If we go to the next slide, you guys can see the comparison between our CPT 6 book as well as our CPT 7. And I think this is important because, guys, the new textbook is like 900 pages long. And I know this is a very small chart. It's hard to see, but as you can see, instead of just, blurring and throwing a bunch of anatomy at you, we're starting to look at more of scope of practice, soft skills, what it takes to be a trainer, because we understand that there are so many people that are changing careers and their career paths. And sometimes, everyone loves to be in fitness and, they're fitness enthusiasts and they think that being a trainer is easy, and it's not. I mean, you need to know the behavioral changes of what you're going to have to deal with clients that are, not easy to work with, or people that have really low self-esteem, or people that get frustrated easy. And so the new textbook I love because it kind of opens with that content first. And then we start diving into the down and dirty, what the muscles do, how they impact your workouts. And then we get into, the model itself along with the assessments. And then, we get into more of program design, utilizing different types of systems, thinking about different types of populations. And then at that point, we still even talk about nutrition. And our nutrition chapter just in our CPT 7 textbook is 60 pages long. And so it's the longest, chapter that we have in that book. However, if you don't take your CNC, this just goes into a deeper dive of the macronutrients, and stuff that you would need to be able to understand and how your body's going to react to different things. And so, like I said, there's a lot of really good information here, but as you can see, kind of wanted to give you a comparison. So when you look at the two, there are some additions, and all of the chapters have been updated. And the wonderful thing too about us and what NASM does is they reach out to people that are not NASM employees, and they try to find the subject matter experts that are top of their game in specific fields and have them contribute to the content. So therefore, again, it is updated research, and we have those individuals taking part in the chapters.
Yeah, and it's interesting, one of my boys is going through it, and it's interesting to see him at 20. I'm glad now that he has this new text, because at his age, I had already gone to school for some of the science. So I don't think I'd have been as intimidated by the anatomy. But to see and hear him talk about it, you can see the excitement going, because he's learning more about the industry than just getting right into it with the science. So it's cool to see. And I completely appreciate why that change was made. And just something simple like that just makes the course more enjoyable for a lot of the people that will be starting out either early in their career or as a career change for sure.
And as we go through some of these, we're going to just highlight some of the main points that you're going to be noticing when you're doing more of the program design. However, remember, every one of these chapters that are listed, it is updated, and there is some newer content within each chapter itself. But I didn't think us spending, probably 2 or 3 hours going over 20 different chapters is something you guys would be interested in. So we're just highlighting some of the major components first. And that kind of brings us just to the template itself. And Marty, do you want to take this, or you want me to do it?
Well, I can start. We'll go back and forth because we both have our ways of explaining it, but it looks very similar, right? There's not drastic changes. We are designing a program here for any phase, as it could be here, total body workout, or again, this could be the splits, but just a very nice, clean, easy template to work off of. You'll still see we have it categorized in sections, and then we still have our sets, reps, tempos, and rests. So we're going to cover some of those changes within each one of those, but you'll still see goal and phase is there at the very beginning, because again, that is so important to what we do at NASM. It's an individualized approach, or maybe a small group, but we don't want to just exercise people. We want to make sure that they're in the right phase of training. And then we get into the flow. So Wendy, I'll start with the warm up, and then, we can jump in and kind of go back and forth. So yes, we're still going to start with the warm up, and we are going to start with myofascial work. So you're going to notice right off the bat, one of the things that's changed is, and it took me a little while, we used to just say SMR, self-myofascial rolling, and your self-myofascial release. People would use that R differently. And what the science shows is we know it works. We know it's beneficial. We know it down-regulates overactive tissue. But because we don't know the exact, the term now is self-myofascial techniques. So you're going to see that R, go to a T. And I know that's going to throw some people off, but now we just start out with self-myofascial techniques for every phase of training if appropriate for your clientele. So Wendy, if you anything you want to add in there?
Well, I mean, if we even go to the next slide, we kind of broke it up even in some more bullet points for you guys. So if we look at, you know, that like Marty just said with the warm up and the flexibility side, I mean, that's, you know, this was a terminology change. And as Marty said, you know, we don't really know what it was releasing. And unless we, you know, started working on people that were alive and trying to do cadaver work, you know, it was really hard to tell because there are different receptors doing different things. It's still, you know, deregulating the tissue. There is still a change, and it is a change for the better to increase range of motion. And so therefore that, you know, we know it's a technique. We know that it is helping down regulate in order to get more pliability, you know, blood flow. And we are getting changes within the tissue that we're spending time on. However, you know, you're still going to hold it 20 to 30 seconds. We're still going to, you know, kind of marinate on that area. And if you guys, you know, and we'll talk about this when we do the same type of thing for the CES, I mean, you know, you can do a pin and stretch and everything, but what we're just trying to do is still focus on the muscles that are overactive. So we are still doing the exact same thing we've done in the past, but that technology or the terminology change, it was for that specific reason. We don't know what it's releasing. Nobody knows what it's releasing. And if they claim they do, I want to know how they found that out. And then, of course, we added dynamic stretching. And so dynamic stretching, because people were already doing it, and it makes sense. And remember what the definition of dynamic stretching is. It's basically we're trying to do a functional movement pattern, such as a lunge or a lunge with rotation, but you need to do it through the full available range of motion. So even in phase one, after you go through and you get some more extensibility through self-myofascial technique and static stretching, then you can go in and add some dynamic stretching, which has shown a lot of positive research that if you're going to do something on a higher level or you're going to play a game, we've always talked about doing the continuum. Marty and I have always talked about that before you're going to play a game. Think about stretching what needs to be stretched, doing some active, and then going into dynamic. So we've just added the ability. It's still optional, but you can, quote, technically, if you're following the recipe book, you're still technically now can add dynamic into all 5 phases.
Yeah, and the key thing is dynamic, even though the word to a lot of personal trainers means explosive, it's as fast as you can control. So dynamic is on such a continuum, whether you're dealing with a 17-year-old or an 87-year-old, right? So it's just what is dynamic to them. So there's a lot of variety there, and there's a lot of options that give you the ability to now feel comfortable, where I think, even though Wendy, you had said it, we had used it, but since it wasn't in the book, maybe some people at the beginning of their career didn't feel comfortable. Now we're just going to talk about it and encourage people to go from that static or that static active into what dynamic is for that person. And it could be simply just sitting in a chair and doing, transverse plane reaches for somebody. That is dynamic for them. So let's not think that it has to be something ballistic. Right? Dynamic is just multi-joint movements in multiple planes at a speed they can control.
Right. And another thing that I didn't actually, or Marty and I didn't add to the slide, that it is still important when we're talking about terminology, is in, phases, 2, 3, and 4, we do active isolated. And well, active isolated, they just remove the word isolated because it's just, call it what it is. It's active stretching. It's still going through, looking at, the ability for one muscle to contract. The antagonist has to relax. So we're still going through playing this. It still serves the same purpose. It's still the same definition, but you are no longer going to see it called active isolated. And it's just now flat out just active stretching. Yep. Awesome. There you go. And so I know, right? So, activation, if you look at the template, it is now like a header of that template. Okay. And, and we're calling it, again, what it is. We are activating those muscles that have shown to be underactive in your assessment. So we're still, talking more about a systematic progression to someone. So we're going to focus on training the local muscles that protect the spine. So your multifidi, the little muscles that go vertebrae to vertebrae. So when we're talking about intervertebral stability, still the same thing in phase 1. And then when we get to strength, we're going to go into more of the global movements. So still things that are going to flex extend and rotate the spine. And then obviously when you get to power, it's going to be more of that type of movement with a power component. So, you know, when we're thinking about core, again, it's just the placement. Like I said, the actual template itself has changed. And you're going to notice now, and this is going to be throughout the entire textbook, we don't say this is a core stabilization exercise. We no longer say that. We say that we're going to start with the muscles training truly for stabilization all the way up to power, but we're trying not to actually put a naming convention, even though the principles are still there. And if you're going to sit for the certification in CPT 7, it's going to say which is more appropriate for phase 1. Would it be something like a plank, a crunch, or a crunch with rotation? Or, you know, crunch with a throw, and you're going to choose plank because again, we're still, you know, focusing on those local stabilizers. So just know that they've taken off kind of like siloing exercises because that's not really fair. However, when you're designing your programming, you still want to think what is the most regressed all the way to progressed and which would make sense for that specific phase of training.
Yep. And I think this gives people some flexibility and freedom to not feel like there's only 3 exercises for core stabilization. And again, we want to teach concepts. We don't want to just give exercises. We want people to understand the concept of what core stabilization is, what a core strength exercise or philosophy is. And then from there, you know how to go through and pick the right exercises. So that way you actually have more of a diverse understanding of it. And you're not just kind of mirroring a couple of exercises that fit into that as an example. We want you to really, truly understand those concepts.
Sure. You want to talk about balance? I mean, it's kind
Absolutely.
of the same.
So yeah, very similar to what Wendy's saying. We're not going to call it balance stabilization, balance strength, or balance power. But clearly when we're focusing on what we would want to do in that early phase of training is we're looking to little to no movement of the stance leg, right? Because we want, can that person own that position for prolonged periods of time? Maybe their arms are moving, maybe they're doing something else with another implement, but can they hold that position without movement of the stance leg? Then when we move up into the different levels, now for a strength, can they move on one leg and can they do it under load? So it could be a single leg squat, single leg Romanian deadlift, some of those type of exercises. Then for your power is, can you hop and land and stick that landing and own that position before you change direction again? So same concepts we've taught, just again, a little bit different with the terminology.
Yes. And then if we look at, you know, go down the template, then we're going to see now that it's going to say, you know, skill development. And so skill development is truly what it is. And so this is where we would put the plyometric training. So we're not changing anything. So keep in mind, it's just now we've got different headers. So it's got, you know, your plyometric training, again, you know, same concepts, it's updated information, but we're still focusing in phase 1 on the landing and then repetitive movement towards strength and then more of an explosive movement pattern. So, you know, we're still keeping in mind what our clients need and the safety of our clients, whether that should be included in their programming or not. But, you know, the information that you're going to see under plyometric, we also start really focusing on the non-athletic populations because, unfortunately, as we know, we're seeing the sedentary numbers rising, especially with COVID. And so we wanted to make sure that you guys kind of thought about some of the, you know, things that they're going to have to go through and ways that you can help on the programming side to best, you know, fit their needs. Yeah. And then again, speed, agility, and quickness training. So when we're talking about that, I mean, it's nothing's changed there, still optional, still up to you. But one of the cool things that I love is that they have it under skill development. They have also included an area where you can really focus more on the fundamental movement patterns. And as you guys know, I mean, there's basic 7, you know, movement patterns that we've talked about before in different webinars, but, you know, it's going to be your squats, your lifts, your pushing, your pulling, your gaits, rotational movements. And we're really showing people here, especially in phase 1, the breakdown of how to do something correctly to move with quality movement patterns before we start loading them up in the resistance section. So if you're going to even be in phase 3 and you know it's a heavy deadlift day, then maybe you'll do some lighter hinge pattern movements, or maybe you'll go over some, you know, teaching and instructions before you get them into the resistance portion. And we just found like this would be a really good place to do that. However, again, your programming is going to be, up to you and what's in the best interest of your clients. But in that section, that's why we have it under skill development, because you're teaching people how to move faster or correctly.
Yeah, I mean, only to basically reiterate everything you just said is I'm thrilled with the term skill development, because I'm hoping that the people that go through this course in the future, or now some of us that are, seeing this as a different term, is we really appreciate what this is supposed to be, right? I was in the gym this morning. Of course, I saw a ton of people doing a lot of these movement patternings or these jumps, and I'm like, they don't have the skill to do those. They haven't been taught properly in a progressive manner. They don't understand the sequencing. They're just jumping and they're just lifting and they're doing things. And yeah, they're burning calories, but they don't understand that this stuff is not just, okay, sit on a bicep curl machine and you can kind of go through it without having to be good at it, right? So I'm really hoping that this translates over to the coaching ability of all the people that are coming through this course to really understand how to make sure that this is done the right way. Because once you accomplish this with your client to the best of their ability, their ability for fitness really opens up more so. But this is such an important part. I love how we transition into it, get the body ready, and then we spend the time teaching these skills. And then from there, I really see that almost everybody's fitness level can go to whatever level that they're capable of if they own this spot right here.
Absolutely.
So that's my 2 cents.
I like it. As we progress on, and again, we're going down the template. So as we showed, and before I get the question, can we download the template? Yes, go to NASM.org. All the templates and everything are there. But when you get to the resistance portion is the exact same thing. It's just the areas where you're going to break up the body parts. You're going to write some stuff in there that's going to be phase appropriate, based on what you know, and then as well as how your client's moving. So that part did not change, but a big one is what we're actually calling phase 3. So phase 3 in the past has been called hypertrophy, phase. So phase 3, hypertrophy training. What we have changed it to is muscular development. With those of you guys like Marty and I that have been around since the dinosaur ages, we've always called it muscular development, and it was actually published as muscular development for many, many years in the NASM methodology in our practice. And the thing is because we're teaching muscular development and hypertrophy, people automatically assume that the goal base was like, bodybuilding and everything. And as you guys know, in order to be big, if you want to be the house, you have to eat the house. I've said that multiple times. So in order to have muscle gain, it depends on what you're fueling your body with in the calorie intake. However, here you are going to gain muscular development. You are going to be lifting, anywhere from 8 to 12 reps. It's going to be a single lift, multi-joint, whatever it is that you want to do on your programming. So the actual acute variables themselves or the adaptation is still the same. It's just, the thing is it makes more sense to call it muscular development, because it doesn't mean, the goal is still hypertrophy, but hypertrophy to an extent of getting muscular gains as well. Does that make sense? I don't know how else to. It makes sense to me, but anywho, so if we go to the next slide.
This is where it gets interesting.
Very interesting.
So I can start off with this if you want.
Sure.
Okay, so you're going to see the acute variables. Anyone that's been certified since the beginning, we had a 3-count tempo. We would do EIC, eccentric, isometric, concentric, and we always said you would have to figure out what part of the exercise, depending where your starting position is the eccentric, isometric, concentric, and you would place the isometric where you felt the most appropriate. However, going back to the BOC, looking at things differently now, there is technically a 4-count that we just never accounted for in the past, because most exercises you can put an isometric in 2 different positions. So using the push-up, for example, you can, if this was a stabilization exercise and I start in the high type of position, I would come down for 4 seconds. Then I would hold an isometric for 2. I would come up into the concentric, And now they're like, okay, do you hold there? Do you not hold there? Well, the 0 shows that you go right back into your eccentric for 4 seconds. Now, technically, some people more at the beginning part of their fitness, you may choose to do the isometric at the top of the push-up. So we just had to account for that 4th part of the muscle contraction spectrum when people are transitioning from concentric to eccentric or isometric, depending on how the exercise goes. So that's where you'll now see this 4th part of the tempo. So it really doesn't change what we're trying to accomplish. It just adds another level of clarity. So hopefully I was clear as I explained that.
Yes. And so as Marty just said, it would be EICI. So if you're going to test, that's how it's written. And that's the reason why, as Marty just said. And then, of course, I've already talked about the name change, but as you guys can see, we went from hypertrophy to muscular development. And then again, we mentioned this when we were talking about core, but all the exercises itself, you want to think about this, systematic to progressive. And so we're still thinking in phase 1 that we want it to be unstable. We want it to be controlled. So we're still using the same thought patterns and process in the program design section. However, you're going to have to make the determination of what fits best and what is in the best interest of your clients on how you're going to actually write out your programs. But just know that it's not going to be labeled, because a push-up, as we know, can be used in all 5 phases. And so we've never termed a push-up as this is a stabilization, this is a strength, or this is a power. Remember, what makes something specific is the acute variables and how it's performed. And so that did not change. And so just understand that when we're talking about, we're not putting a naming convention on it. It still is hopefully going to, when you're in each phase of training, you're still going to apply those acute variables, which are going to build those specific adaptations per phase. So as Marty said, we didn't change the model. It's just we had to update it. And more of this, the acute variables is industry standards that were changed by the Board of Certification. And so it wasn't the NASM's trying to confuse anybody or anything like that. That's just how it's written. And this is going to be industry-wide. One other really cool thing is they included a section on safety. And so those of you guys that are brand new to training, those of you who are like, okay, I'm going to just now start working with clients, and I've only done things online, or now I'm going to go face-to-face because COVID's over or whatever. They've actually included a section talking about your environment to make sure that it's safe. And then also, how do you spot? Because I've seen so many trainers oftentimes spot incorrectly, where it's really not safe for the trainer or their client. And so we have to also think about our best interest in the safety of our client performing it, but also making sure that we're offering the best support and techniques that we can. So there's really good information about cueing and setup and all that. So I was really glad for the inclusion of that in this chapter.
Yeah, without a doubt, because there's just, and again, depending on the size of the people, could be a person that is, smaller in stature, training somebody that's, incredibly strong, taking all that into consideration. So both people are safe. And then the other bullet point on this slide is, we never really talked about a true warm-up set. We talked about what the work sets would be. So now, again, we had some questions on that. So we'll add some information about the warm-up set for the phases, complex training. There's different philosophies out there, and then the giant sets, etc. So just always going through the terminology that's out in the industry, talking about it, seeing the science behind it, and adding even more value as we get into different types of phases with some of those things that are common within the industry. And we'll talk about each and every one of those there.
Yes. And then when we go to the next slide, you're going to see we have a new little section. And you can still put it in the resistance part, but this is kind of something that you're going to notice that's brand new on that template, and it's client choice. And this is the new section, because what we've learned is clients, they love certain exercises. They do. And the thing is if they are doing something that they love, there's more engagement within the program. They become a part of the programming too, and it's really good for compliance. So when you're thinking about it on an accountability standpoint, it's more fun, then we wanted to include it in there. However, one thing to keep in mind is you still want to follow the acute variables. So if somebody, for example, in phase 1, sometimes we do buys and tries, and we don't add in a special buy and try exercise. And it's mainly because they're doing so many exercises already that may be multi-joint, such as a step up to balance, to bicep curl and press. But they love to do barbell bicep curls. That's just their thing. They love it. Is it going to hurt them to do that again? No. Do you need to count for it on volume and what they're lifting? Yes. So if you know that they love that, you're giving them what they love, then you're going to maybe have to change some of your other exercises above. So maybe they're not doing so many curls and choosing something different. However, once you say, okay, now we're going to do your biceps, we're going to work on the gun show, they get a smile on their face. They're like, all right, you've made me do all this crazy balance crap. Now I want to do what I like. This is what we added in there. And again, this is up to you as the trainer to determine that this is in their best interest. And then also, again, the acute variables, because if somebody wants to do a power day, like they want to go in and do like plyometric, let's say leg presses where they're bounding or something like that off of a machine, and they're in phase 1 and their feet turn out, their knees cave in, not safe, not ideal. So maybe try to come up with something else that they may enjoy and then work their way up to that one exercise that they love.
Yep, absolutely. And again, I would kind of, play the game and trick them. And if they said an arm exercise, I might put them in a glute bridge to do their tricep extensions, right? So I'm always going to control the narrative. But as you said, it's they kind of look forward to that at the end where they have a part of it. And if I know what they're going to pick, sometimes I just purposely wouldn't put that in their program, knowing that that's what they're going to add in. So, it's kind of fun that way to give them a little bit of control over the session.
And we always talk about trying to have your programs done, ahead of time. And so for me, when I gather that information, I have always asked that question in the subjective portion of the assessment, like, hey, what exercises, if they've been in the gym, obviously, what exercises do you love to do? What are the ones that you're passionate about and why? And so I take notes of that, because when I feel that it's important, then I try to add some of that stuff in there. And I've always done that in the past. Now we just have a section for it. You will have some people that are new to the gym, they have no idea and don't put anything in there. And then as you start working more and more with them, you're gonna hear this, oh, I love this exercise, or oh, that's the worst exercise ever, I hate it, but you're taking mental notes anyway, so it just allows them to be a part of the program.
Absolutely.
And so when we go into the next slide, the cool down, Marty, do you want to take this?
Yeah. So again, we already talked about the warm-up about how we've changed it from SMR to SMT. So it's still the same concepts. We are not changing any of the science behind it in the CPT. And then we're still going to do the static stretching for all phases, targeting the muscles that we tend to see that are overactive. So nothing changes there except the R becomes a T.
Yes. And so if we move on and we're now off of the actual template itself that you're designing their actual workout. When we get into the cardiorespiratory assessments itself, you're going to notice that there are some additions in the assessment components of the chapter. And as I mentioned, Marty and I have done a webinar specifically talking about your VT1 and VT2 when it's appropriate, but then also, again, how do you get those numbers and how, because it is a specific it's a specific protocol that you need to follow in order to get the ideal VT1 number. And you're talking about your ventilatory threshold. That's what VT stands for. And when they say 1, those are more for people that are sedentary up to someone that's not at a high level at this point. We're looking for their steady state where it's going to be an even mix between fats and carbohydrates. And so you're going to see that their numbers are going to kind of every 20 seconds you're talking to them. You're looking at a minute, the last 20 seconds you want them to hold a conversation. And everything is going to be based off of your RPE, so your rate of perceived exertion. And so if you're not familiar with that, you want more in-depth information, listen to our podcast or our webinar, if you will. And then the same thing with VT2. These are more high-end athletes, people that have a really good foundation, somebody that can do max type of cardio work for 20 minutes at a higher level, because then you're going to take the last 5 measurements of their heart rate, the last 5 minutes, you're going to average those out, times in 0.95, get that number. And at that point, that's their VT2. And all of this information is in the textbook. And then of course, we've removed the 1 mile run. And now we've added the 1.5 because it's more updated. There's more research on it. And so therefore, obviously you have to have a client that can run 1.5 miles, and that's going to be it's time-based. That's how that one is recorded. And as I mentioned earlier, we're no longer doing 220 minus age just because it was too generalized. That was never meant in any part of our industry, never meant to be like the standard of how someone should find where they are on a percentage. If, because age factors, and, same thing with the Carbonian method, the higher, like the older you are, it would have an inverse relationship. It wasn't as accurate. And so this will help us become more accurate in the programming.
Yeah. And even, I had read some articles, and don't quote me, but even the doctors that had created the 220 minus age, they weren't thinking it was going to be the gold standard. It was just kind of something that they were throwing around. And, I always use the example of my twins. They're 20 now. And if one's a triathlete and one's a couch potato, just because they're both 20, their heart rate should be the same. It just doesn't make sense. Right. So I'm glad that we have, as an industry, and I think part of the delay was we were dealing with heart rate. So there was a lot of fear that what if we pick numbers that are too challenging and too high? So I'm really thrilled that we're getting, as an industry, more scientific in how we prescribe people their cardiorespiratory training, because it just makes sense that you're going to test where they're at, not just give them a raw number based on an age, regardless of their activity.
Perfect. So if we move to the next slide, once you have that information, again, Marty and I did another webinar specifically on the stage training. And so just as a recap, in the past, we had different percentages, and those percentages really did fit within the phases of training too, because as someone became more in shape, we increased it from 70 or 65 to 75. And then we went from, all the way up to almost 85 to 100% when they got to power. And so these are going to focus mainly on your VT1 and VT2 scores, which will make it more accurate for the client. And so when you're looking at, stages 1, 2, and 3, those are going to be for your fitness enthusiasts, the people that like to work out. And then, when you get to phase 4, that's mainly for your elite athletes. And phase 5 is when you're doing drills out on the court or on the field or something like that. So they're more performance-based types of cardio that you're doing on the field and measuring it that way. So completely different. Another thing too that you're going to notice in the cardio stage training chapters is that we no longer just use the FIT model. We have added FIT VP, and the V stands for variation, and your P is your progression. And so when we're looking at that, all the other numbers are still the same, which still stands for everything, but it is an updated model based on research, because those two components really do make a big difference.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. So that's why that changed. And then before we even get to the key takeaways, I know we had a couple questions in here, but I also wanted to mention that in the assessment components, because it just triggered with the assessments, but in this, when you're doing your assessments, we always talked about subjective information as well as objective information. And remember, when you're getting the measurements and you're doing the movement analysis and transitional types of assessments, that's going to be the objective component, because that's what you're going to go back. You're going to have starting numbers, and then you're going to see how they progress. When you're doing the subjective information, another change that we have now is something called the PAR-Q, but it's the PAR-Q plus. And it is no longer just a one-page card, where they're just checking off yes and no. It's a little more detailed. And that was because, as we've seen, more detail is better, as we know. But that's going to be also something that you're going to notice when your clients first come in. If you're going to our charts and you're going to print out some of the documents that we provide, it'll say the PAR-Q plus, and you're going to notice more information to gather from your client.
And that's important to, the more information you gather at the beginning, more rapport building, the more fully you'll understand that client, at least at that point, and then can design the best program and or at least understand where they're coming from, from their philosophies as well as medically, for sure.
So I'll take this this question. If you guys have other questions while they're going, please feel free to type them in now so we can make sure everyone feels comfortable with the content. But Coach L portion still focus on meal plan style eating and macro splits, or will it now include portion-based eating similar to PN, so precision nutrition? So the way that our chapter is is outlined, or the way that we have it. Again, it's going to go into specific details, but our main ones are, we start out, of course, with scope of practice. We want to make sure that we kind of stay within our scope, that we know what we can and cannot say legally, unless we hold a license, a specific license, like we're a registered dietitian. We do offer, of course, our macronutrients. So we're still talking about proteins, carbohydrates, as well as our lipids. After that, we go into even more detail talking about the macronutrients and hydration and the importance it plays on that. So there we're talking about fat-soluble vitamins. We're talking about water-soluble vitamins, water and performance, as well as sports drinks, and when it's appropriate, and how we know when, somebody needs that, especially depending on the sport, athlete, or temperature changes. So it's very good information there. There's also a section talking about the factors that influence weight management. So we do a really good job, I think, going into the law of thermodynamics, as well as sleep, the endocrine system, and the disorders along with that, medications, metabolism, as well as the adaptive thermogenesis. So if you guys are interested in learning a little bit more detail, of course, in that. We talk a lot about the food labels, so the differences between the US food labels versus the UK. And so we talk about how to read those. And lastly, a big part of it is going to be the goal-based nutrition strategies. So we talk about everything from fat loss to muscle gain, as well as more sports performance. And so if you're interested in those, it is a little bit different. Again, updated research. We had a lot of people that work specifically in this field be a part of this as a subject matter expert. So that was just that one chapter alone. That's why it's 60 pages, y'all.
That's a very detailed review.
Yes. Did you like that? Very detailed answer. It's part of being a regional master instructor. We have to go into detail. So, our key takeaways on this, and the reason we wanted to bring it to the forefront, is because I know a lot of people have asked us, like, do I need this new textbook? Is it worth it? And the answer to me is yes. Like, I love this book. I think they did a fantastic job with it. But it's updated based on current research, as well as current industry standards. And so, I think the cardio part, that's a game changer. It's totally different, and it's very different than anything we've ever produced before, because it is what people are using, and it's very accurate. The design templates, I think, are great, because again, we're just making it very clear. And, we still have, just remember, guys, the model itself has not changed. Still the same concepts, everything that Marty and I have talked about since last March, about the phases of training, the adaptations they're going to get. The only difference is we changed the name of phase 3 to be truly what it is, which is muscular development. And then we added a 4 count to those acute variables because we had to. And so we do what we're told. And we do what we're told to stay accredited, which is super important for all of us that are NASM-CPT certified.
Yeah. And I think another value is this just gives you kind of a recheck on your skill set. There's going to be, there's things that Wendy and I are going to pick up, and we've been teaching this for God knows how many years. So, even though you're certified and been certified and you've done things to get your CEUs done, I still love to dive back into the course. And there's going to be some little things that kind of maybe you breeze past last time, or they jump out to you more this time because of your years of training. You're going to be like, man, I use that more than I thought, or I could be using this. Then you add in some of the new layers to it. So I think it's a great kind of restart and a refresh for everybody, because there's enough new stuff in there, but it never hurts to go back and review some of those basics that you think you feel comfortable with.
Yes. And it also lets you know too where your niche is. I mean, if there's something that sticks out that you really love, then maybe it's, either courses that we offer, because we do try to, take it, like, for example, with the nutrition question, we try to take it a step further. I mean, it's different. We are different than Precision Nutrition. However, I really like our CNC. I think they did a great job. I like the people that did it. I love the way that we have organized it. I like the videos because I'm a visual learner. And so, one cool thing too about the CPT-7 is we have a new library, a video library. And what that does is, unfortunately, you're stuck listening to me and some of these other master instructors, but we are actually coaching a client through an actual exercise. So for example, if we were doing a chest press on the ball, you're going to see me talk to my client of how I get them in the right positioning. I go through the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints to make sure that they're in the right position before they start. We go through a full available range of motion without compensation. We go through the tempo, depending on the phase. And then at that point, we complete it. So on the video, we're actually teaching you what to look for, teaching you proper execution, and then teaching you some cueing that we thought may be super beneficial for those of you guys that are new.
No, I think overall it's completely, well done. Great new information. I think people will really enjoy the process of going through it, even if they've been certified already.
Great. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions.
Nope.
So I will go ahead and give my contact. Geez, content.
You've already given us
talking. I know, right? Y'all are probably tired of listening to me chat all day, but if you guys have questions or you think about some questions later on, you can email Marty and I at any time. But if you want to email me directly, it's just wendy.bats@nasm.org, or you can shoot me over a message on Instagram, which is wendy.bats13.
And my email right there, marty.miller@nasm.org. And then Instagram is dr.martymiller72. So Wendy, great job as always. Thanks for all that great information. Always a pleasure working with you. And we look forward to seeing everybody next Thursday on a whole brand new topic for next week.